Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, The Great Wealth Transfer, What Advisors Need to Know. My name is Radhia, and I lead marketing here at the Canadian Securities Institute. Before we begin, we'd just like to take a moment to share a few important notes with the audience. The ratings, financial analysis, projections, and other observations constituting part of the information contained herein are and must be construed solely as statements of opinion and not statements of fact or recommendations to purchase, sell, or hold any securities. We strongly recommend you speak with a qualified financial advisor regarding your own unique circumstances. We ask that no one record this webinar without Moody's explicit written permission and remind you that no one has the permission to quote any of the comments made or questions asked by the webinar audience. Today's webinar is also being recorded. All members of the audience are currently on mute. If you have a question, we encourage you to type it in the Q&A box, and we ask that you please keep your questions as generic as possible and avoid personal or client-specific information. Now let's jump into today's session. Excuse me. Joining us today are Susan Sene-Stamp, Senior Vice President of Financial Services at Leger, and Mark Mercier, Partner and Co-Chair of Private Client Group, Castles Brock and Blackwell LLP. Today's discussion is an important one, which centers on the profound impact of wealth transfers and inheritances, events that go beyond financial transactions to become emotional milestones that shape family dynamics, personal values, and long-term aspirations. With over $1 trillion anticipated to change hands in the coming years, clients are increasingly seeking trusted advisors who can navigate the emotional complexities of these transitions. They need guidance that is not only timely and strategic, but also deeply empathetic and aligned with their unique values. Susan and Mark will provide insights into how advisors can address the multifaceted challenge of wealth transitions while fostering stronger multi-generational relationships with their clients. Thank you both for joining us today. I think it would be great to start by getting a better grasp of what exactly the Great Wealth Transfer actually is and what it reveals about how people are prepared or unprepared for this historic event here in Canada. Mark, could you help us understand that a little bit better?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Radhia, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, we're diving into one of the most significant financial shifts in Canadian history. It's known as the Great Wealth Transfer, and you probably see lots of references to that statement in the popular press these days, and it's very, very real. What it is, in essence, is over the next 2 decades, more than $1 trillion will move from one generation to the next right here in Canada. Canada is a microcosm of this particular issue, which is global in nature. And if you think of Canada being involved in $1 trillion worth of intergenerational wealth transfer, it's multiples greater in the United States. So, that is a really large amount of money. It's almost unfathomable, really. But at the end of the day, the discussion, as Radhia has already, alluded to, is more than just about the money. It's about values, it's about legacy, it's about responsibility, it's about communication, and a whole host of other things. And it's absolutely critical today in Susan's and my humble views that investment advisors have a very important role to play in this dynamic, complex situation. And there's no question that investment advisors do have an opportunity to play the role of being or becoming trusted guides during this important transition. Research in Canada, including research undertaken by thought leaders like Leger, which Susan's obviously going to highlight in greater detail, and certainly supplemented by a lot of research in the United States, echoes this urgency, underscoring that this is a global trend that requires proactive advisor action. So let's try to put this great wealth transfer into a little bit of a context. And there's a historical financial shift that's going on. This $1 trillion, and that's at the low end of estimates, is going to move from one generation to the next over the next 2 decades. This is not just a financial event, it's a societal shift. So to put that into perspective, just think about Prime Minister Carney's budget that was released last week. The federal budget for 2025 is about $487 billion. This transfer that we're talking about today is more than double that. It equals roughly 40% of Canada's GDP. It involves a massive redistribution of wealth. To match this transfer, the federal government would need 2 years of all of its spending right across Canada to total what we're talking about today. To put it even a finer point on it, Ontario's GDP is about $1.2 trillion. So this transfer is literally about the size of Ontario's economy for 1 year. Why does this matter? This is the largest wealth handoff in Canadian history. It will reshape family dynamics, financial markets, advisory roles for the foreseeable future. For advisors, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. But having said that, and using the word opportunity, there's lots of risk, especially for those who either choose to ignore the great wealth transfer or remain passive on the topic altogether. So one of the key questions that we see as professionals involved in this area is, are Canadians prepared? Here are some very, very frank thoughts as it relates to that. Studies in Canada consistently show 54% of Canadians lack an estate plan. Stop and reflect on that for a moment. We're literally talking about more than half of the population that literally does not have an estate plan. Only slightly more than 25% of benefactors have a full wealth transfer strategy, and just about 35% of inheritors feel that they are prepared. 34% of younger Canadians say inheritance is crucial for their own financial needs going forward. And yet 31% of older Canadians aren't even sure that they're going to have anything to leave the next generation. So you can see this is quite a complex topic. The sheer amount of money that $1 trillion represents, the numbers clearly show in staggering terms that Canadians are not and are definitely ready, and they're definitely not prepared for this pending transfer of wealth. The same is true in the US. Now, this involves a discussion around legacy and responsibility. This represents a profound shift of values, legacy, and responsibility that goes beyond the financial assets involved. Advisors provide financial, emotional, and strategic support to families navigating this complexity and are ideally placed to play important, trusted roles in the area going forward. Now, what are the implications for investment advisors? Here's the problem opportunity conundrum. Families without plans face tax inefficiencies, disputes, and wealth erosion. These are real risks for those that are not properly prepared. Advisors who act today can act as facilitators in this estate planning process and act as key components to initiating family conversations. Investment advisors can commence discussions and help families to commence those discussions around considering and implementing tax-efficient strategies, trusts, gifting, charitable giving, and the like. But it's also a unique opportunity for investment advisors to help families with financial education. And Susan's going to speak more about that. But the $1 trillion transfer is a tsunami of opportunity, not just risk, but there's opportunity here. Advisors who lead will strengthen not only their client relationships, but they will also help their clients capture growth opportunities into the future. The downside risk, of course, is those who wait risk being left behind and experiencing a very turbulent future that can and likely will see their portfolios diminish overall in a very material way. So just how vast and urgent is this challenge? Let's look at a couple of wealth transfer demographics. Most wealth will move from baby boomers, 1946, born in 1946 to 1964. I guess technically I'm not a baby boomer, but pretty close to it. They are people that are currently aged 61 to 79. That transfer is going to involve Gen X, those that were born in 1965 to 1980, currently aged 45 to 60, and millennials, those that were born 1981 to 1996, currently aged 29 to 44. It is fair to say, and the research clearly indicates, that many heirs lack the financial literacy. This creates a huge gap and a huge risk for families that are involved in intergenerational wealth transfer. It increases the risks of mismanagement, latent tax issues, and in some cases, unfortunately, even creating family disputes. Advisors who engage with their clients early can be very, very helpful to their clients in helping to mitigate against these risks and to help them to become or enhance their roles as trusted partners. Data reinforces this urgency. Inheritance inequality and demographic shifts, which means that the best types of planning should be inclusive and timely. It requires forethought and planning, and ultimately, to the investment advisors on the line, communication. There is urgency due to the complexity that's involved. Demographic shifts and complex financial plans require urgent action for relationship building and continuity. Investment advisors are uniquely placed to play key and important roles here. So now I want to quickly turn the floor over to Susan, and she can talk about the great research that Leger has been doing behind the scenes. Susan?
I really appreciate this, Mark. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. And, Mark, I really like the thoughtfulness and clarity of the context that you've shared with everyone, especially around the implications and this key point of asking ourselves if Canadians are prepared for this financial future. And I would also hazard to say that, we shouldn't just think about this as this future event that is going to happen at some point. It is currently happening, and I will share some demographics around those shifting profiles later. But for right now, really addressing the preparedness issue. One of the first things that really stood out to me from this research, and this is from our Leger Financial Compass, we collected data back in July and really focused on the Great Wealth Transfer. What we are seeing is that we have the majority of Canadian adults, so 61%, who are saying, yes, absolutely, I expect to give an inheritance. But then 35% who are expecting to receive one. And we'll revisit this in a bit. And the reason this stood out is there's a gap. So the first signal that we're seeing in the data is that there are more Canadians who plan on gifting an inheritance than there are those aware that they're receiving one. This is a planning, this is a preparedness, this gets in the way of being able to receive that confidently, responsibly. As advisors, there is this opportunity for, the conversations you have with clients where it can be a very simple question of, is this beneficiary aware of what is coming their way? Could we include them in this conversation? It is definitely, as Mark said, a once in a generation event, but it's not a one-time opportunity for supporting and guiding and building these relationships. And really what we are looking at what we see in our research is that there are gaps where Canadians, there's a greater opportunity still to build relationships with advisors, build relationships with their primary financial institution, which is where the relationships start. And as I said, that gap is important. The fact that there are fewer Canadians aware that they are receiving one. We also see that amongst those who expect an inheritance, just over 4 in 10 do not have an advisor relationship. 1 in 2-ish, so 53% are on the fence about switching their primary FI. So there are implications from a relationship and sustainability and long-term impact for the sector as well.
Thank you. Those are some really great insights, and it's really great to have context to help everybody sort of better understand what's actually happening here. Susan, can you help us expand a little bit more on what some of the risks are that are associated with what's going on and how those changes are sort of changing the role of the advisor, how the advisor is evolving?
Of course, and that's really what I was getting at with the previous statement there about the opportunities for advisors. So as I mentioned, we have, 44% of those who expect an inheritance are working without an advisor. We have 53%, at risk of churn from their primary FI. And then we are also seeing that the role of the advisor is at risk of not being as deep or as broad, depending on how you relate and what the client's needs may be. Because what we are seeing through our research again is that Canadians are really self-serving on the getting, they self-serve with getting information regarding financial decisions, investment decisions, things of that nature. So they are out getting that information on their own. They're doing it online, be it through a computer or smartphone. There are some who are following advisors or banks on social media, but they are doing that on their own and then making their financial decisions, their investment decisions in person. And it is a preferred method. Now, what we didn't ask explicitly, but I would hazard to hypothesize is part of making that decision in person is also limitations of just all that one can currently do online on their own. Not everything is self-direct, for instance, investments. But why I would position this as a potential risk to the role of the advisor is what we don't want is to become order takers, right? There is so much expertise and knowledge and actual, awareness of long-term implications of decisions, which is the role of an advisor. And once someone shows up with all the information in hand and a decision to go, you almost can find yourself in a situation where you say, well, do I make my client happy by saying yes? How much opportunity room do I now have to advise? I mean, these are risks, right? These are risks to limiting just how much one can lean in, which also then has so are you having the longer term conversations? Would they bring their beneficiary to have that? So it's really we really want to remember that digital serves a great purpose, and that really is about sparking interest. But it's the relationships, it's the human connections, it's the advisory and support that advisors provide that really is where trust then comes from. And so, I would say I base my views and learnings on the research plus industry expertise, but really, Mark, over to you on why it then becomes so crucial for that advisors to be making that shift.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. It's interesting, right? Because you're sort of at the front end of doing this research, and I'm more so at the back end in helping with the management of relationships. And these relationships are inherently human in nature. And you've said a couple of things that I really wanted to sort of drive home to the audience here. There is definitely a risk of client attrition. To me, the hard and cold facts are that 70 to 90% of heirs switch advisors after inheriting wealth, both in Canada and the United States. This represents a massive risk of client loss. So Again, I reiterate what I said at the outset. If you choose to do nothing or to be very passive on this subject, you actually run a risk of massive client loss, assets under admin, and the like. So, stop and think about the fact that 70 to 90% of existing advisor relationships today are at risk. And do you want to be on the cutting edge or the bleeding edge of that risk and losing clients for the next 2 decades? Or do you want to be proactive and actually use this as an opportunity to flip the risk into an opportunity? So it's not, risk of client attrition, but actually the opportunity of, client accretion, if you will, gathering. So to me, avoiding wealth transfer talks when you're an IA and an inherent part of the wealth management team for individuals and families means missed opportunities to strengthen relationships that are literally right before you right now, and to really reinforce the fact that you as an IA have the potential of being not just part of the wealth transfer, but you could actually be part of the epicenter of individuals and families' trusted advisors network. Advisors must move, as Susan said, from being task focused, simple order takers, to more strategic planners, thinkers, and relational roles. And that to me requires a little bit of a shift in the way in which investment advisors operate from a mindset perspective. And at the end of the day, firms in Canada are investing heavily in technology and personalization. But at the end of the day, as Susan, noted quite well, trust still hinges on human connection. And to me, that's where you want to be. You want to be the trusted advisor, and you can't do that by sending bland daily emails to folks. You've got to make the effort to really forge ahead with that human connection. And I would strongly encourage folks on the call to really make meaningful efforts to forge that human connection. So now let me turn this back over to Susan, and I think she'll provide some real guidance to everyone on how to get this conversation started.
For sure. No, and thanks for that, Mark. And what stands out is the your advice around not to avoid talking about wealth transfer. It's also ensuring that that conversation is meaningful. So we're going back to this gap, right? This gap between 61% expecting to give an inheritance versus 35% who expect to receive. As an advisor, one of the best ways I would imagine starting the conversation can be that forward-looking. Are there plans for inheritances, be they through your will or a living trust, whatever it might be, making sure that the future beneficiary is aware, but also really taking note that it's not just expected or presumed behaviors that some might have, where we are just thinking, what might this risk be? So a lot of what Mark shared, of course, comes from his deep expertise in this sector. But we also know that right now, when we think about individuals who have already given an inheritance, and there are many in our survey, we have a third of them did so with no guidance from anyone. They did it on their own. Think about that. Now think about that in the context of, and I love the phrasing, Mark, of a tsunami, this wealth transfer being a tsunami. I mean, that's a very strong, powerful wave. We don't want a third or more continuing this pattern of giving an inheritance on their own. And then I'd like to point your attention to another finding, which is that Among those who've already received an inheritance, 41%, so a greater proportion, also did so with no one. They did it on their own. So now we're going beyond just getting information and making decisions in person. This is the whole spectrum of it. So again, it's to Mark's point of it, it's not, don't avoid the conversation, but really be aware of the impact of having that conversation early, consistently, meaningfully, in a way that resonates with that client and in communication with prospective clients. So that's what we're seeing. Again, this going it alone is not just something folks think they might do. We are seeing that they have done it already.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you both for all of those insights. I think to sort of complement what you're discussing in terms of being strategic and more engaging as opposed to using sort of blanket advisory practices. Mark, do you think you can help us better understand how advisors can effectively bridge that gap that you're talking about, bridge that divide between generations in the wealth transfer process?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. And at the end of the day, I know we've got 4 bullet points on this page, Raja, but I actually stopped over the weekend to think a little bit more about this, and it's clearly these are the high level points, but I'm going to add to this list. Clearly deepening the client relationship. If it wasn't obvious before this call, it certainly is now. Getting deeper with your client relationships is absolutely essential, and I think that there's no better time than now to focus in on that. But I also wanted to talk about the fact that, I think historically, the investment business, the wealth management business was very transactional in nature. And I think it's a unique opportunity. The time is now to move beyond being transactional or the order taking type of approach to something that is more transformational. And what I really mean about that is, advisors need to evolve from in the way that they manage their relationships and become part of an ecosystem that helps their clients with life-changing financial decisions. This means focusing in on purpose-driven planning, helping families articulate their values, legacy goals, and philanthropic aspirations. There is no one size fits all. There's no silver bullet. It's a very complex topic, but you have to start by really focusing in on making these relationships less transactional and more transformational, if you will. I also think that there's a very important part here. Investment advisors are specialists in providing investment advice. Lawyers are specialists in providing legal advice. And, you can go on with all of the different professions. They're all experts at what they do. But I think the intergenerational wealth transfer, you need to look at things a little more holistically. And the advisor that manages this wealth and oversees this wealth, again, is uniquely placed to play an integral part in this holistic advisory environment, and providing services that go beyond merely investment management is important. And if played correctly, the investment advisor should be at the epicenter of all of these professional relationships. So I would focus in on the holistic aspects here. There's also another area, and again, when folks are trained in the investment advisory area, much like wealth management, very rarely do folks talk about emotional intelligence and communication skills. And at the end of the day, managing wealth is very much about being aware and being prepared to engage in discussions that involve emotions and family dynamics, as it's really at the end of the day, these are soft skills. And to the extent that folks can focus in on some of these soft skills, they're going to do exceedingly well, in my opinion. There's something that Susan touched on in her presentation where she talked about technology and yet the importance of having human interaction. And the reality is we live in a digital world. I haven't heard the words artificial intelligence yet, but I do know clients routinely, go into Copilot and other artificial intelligence services to help them formulate their views on a wide variety of things. And this is certainly very evident in the wealth management area. I can't tell you how many times clients send me documents, and it becomes very apparent by the end of me reading these documents that they've generated them through AI. So, again, I would just go back to something that Susan said. It's great to have all this technology and all these digital aspects of our lives that improve our lives, but there's nothing better than human connectivity. So I would reinforce that as well. The next area that is really problematic, and I know Susan has touched upon it, we have vast amounts of our population that are just not all that financially literate. And education, it sounds like something that's so basic, and yet it's sort of it's really lacking. And you, as a trusted advisor, have an opportunity to help bridge that gap on the educational front and being very proactive in that regard. And clients really do appreciate that focus. So finally, I would strongly recommend that you not be afraid of providing education where you can. Rely on some of the experts within your universe to provide that information and education. You can't educate on everything because it's highly complex, as we talked about. The last thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's not on this, it's not really highlighted too much, is revenue growth and differentiation. It did make it into the PowerPoint, but again, I see this as a huge opportunity for those who get it. And you don't obviously want to put this ahead of your client's interests, but I can tell you that a positive offshoot of doing this and being proactively involved in this wealth transfer discussion, I strongly suspect that you're going to see your revenues grow as well. And again, I don't want to highlight this too much, but it's a positive offshoot that does occur when you do this part of your job very, very well. So I'm now gonna, I think, and just in case I'm still on cue here, Susan, I'm gonna now turn it over to you because I know that you want to talk a little bit about reflecting on the personal values in the financial decision framework.
For sure.
Have I caught up to you again?
You have.
Okay.
No, this is great.
Okay.
I actually just have to make sure I don't just get caught up with. I'm really enjoying listening to you share all these insights, Mark. And the point around the human connection. We do hear it a lot. I'm sure we do. And I feel like sometimes we may all in our various roles feel a little overwhelmed with, well, how human is too human before I cross a line? How human is too human before, if to be glib, I make it weird? Well, that's where you take your cues from your clients. And I share this because what we do know, again, through our wealth transfer research, is that we have swaths of Canadians. So now we're hitting probably some of the largest proportions in our research where their personal values now come into play. So we have 8 in 10 who say that having their personal values reflected in the financial advice they receive is important to them. We have more than that, so almost 9 in 10 who are saying that having a financial strategy that reflects their personal values is important to them. And then when we look at, the cross section of where values are present, the importance of values, and inheritance, either expectations or behaviors having already been done, we clearly see that for Canadians, this isn't just math. Well, how much do I give to this person, or how much do I give to that, and to who do I turn to, and how many sources? This is really, really genuinely important. And we see it increase in importance when we are now speaking about giving or receiving an inheritance. So the human interaction, that human element is, do you know your client's personal values? Do you know what those are? Have you had that conversation? You know, we see that they are willing to share that these values come into play, asking, getting a temperature check. That's what we're seeing in the data here. And to your point, Mark, and Radia, forgive me, I'm going to go a little off where it's something that's not on the slide either. But Mark, you really triggered some thinking for me with regards to the financial fluency point, and it is Financial Fluency Month after all. You know, don't don't overestimate, or don't take for granted how much Canadians might overestimate how much they think they know in this topic, or their comfort levels, because we also did ask about their confidence in making solo decisions versus, concerns around making mistakes with money. It's a funny looking Venn diagram. There is far more confidence and far more at the same time worry. And again, this is where advisors, clear communication, and understanding what is meaningful to to Canadians right now, especially when it comes to wealth transfers. And I believe, Radia, exactly. Thank you so much. I had made a point earlier around, wanting to be mindful that we don't speak about this tsunami. I love that, Mark. This tsunami of wealth that's transferring. That we don't want to think about it as just, something off in the future. We also do know it's both happening now, and we see that. And I want to really highlight this part around, maybe challenge some presumptions there might be. Let's start in the middle here. We have younger Canadians, so Gen Z, millennials. We have a third of each who have actually already received an inheritance. And we also found in our research, and then tested it again in other research, about 1 in 10 in each of these younger groups have also already given what they feel is an inheritance. And it came to help others, to support others. So money's transferring earlier, younger. That profile is really, really shifting. And it matters because not only are we seeing these younger Canadians who have received an inheritance already, and it's the Gen Z part really that I want to bring to your attention. But let's also look at where the opportunity to lean in and support and advise and guide lies. Younger Canadians are almost 1.5 times more likely, or less likely, pardon me, to have an advisor. So there's this white space of opportunity to help. They are also far less likely to even have a financial strategy. So they're young, the future's laying ahead, they are receiving inheritances, they're doing it without an advisor, they're doing it without a financial strategy. That gives me pause. And they are also more likely to be worrying about making mistakes with gifted money. So now you layer in this layer, you bring in this element of anxiety, and it's feeling a little hard to be a younger Canadian. But I also wanted to speak to a couple changing profiles that are very important to note demographically as the country's demographics are evolving, we are noting that we have a third of women currently expect to receive an inheritance, and there is other research outside of what Leger has conducted, but research within the industry that it was really showing that women are an increasing proportion of Canadians who are going to be receiving wealth and holding wealth in Canada in ways that they've not done before. And this is coming from a couple of factors. One, greater longevity of life. Also having the greater potential of receiving an inheritance from two sides, from one or two parents and from a spouse, especially if that woman is in a relationship with a man, given the longer life cycles. So we want to be understanding women more, and not necessarily just in comparison to men. Let's really take a moment and think about our playbook, how we start conversations with women. They are less comfortable making financial decisions on their own. So consider how that conversation might go. They are far more likely to use words that are very emotional, like kindness and compassion, when they think about their legacy. Think about the personal values. Do you know those of your clients? Another group to also highlight, again, as the demographics of the country evolve and grow, are those of BIPOC Canadians, where we see in our research 42% currently expect to receive an inheritance. That is actually one of the greatest segments in the populations that we surveyed where we see this. So they are 1.3 times more likely to expect an inheritance than everyone else. Now couple that with values, now couple that with whether they're advisors or strategy plans. I mean, there's a lot to just understand about the profile, and that the, I will say, quote unquote, traditional playbook may not necessarily work as well. And a critical note with BIPOC Canadians, they are just over twice as likely to be turning to friends and family for guidance and support when it comes to an inheritance than they are to anyone else. So now these conversations are being contained, and it becomes more and more difficult to find footing in them. So really want to make sure that we had the opportunity to share these findings from our research, especially from a more forward-looking perspective.
That's really great information, and it is a really important conversation, I think, that we need to have about the various demographics, financial literacy, how people are impacted by lack of that, and how conversations need to look different for different people. Mark, I really liked what you said about being less transactional and more transformational. I think I'm going to steal that. Really, really like that. And sort of in line with, the previous question around bridging the intergenerational gap, and to both of your points about a holistic approach to advice. Mark, how can advisors empower their clients to feel more confident and engaged and in control of their finances, to sort of complement what was just previously said by Susan in relation to just various people requiring advice and advisors actually being able to integrate an approach with them where they can actually feel like they're in control?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because as Susan mentioned, it really requires an ability to have conversations, easy conversations, hard conversations. And this isn't something that is taught in law school, and there isn't a course on conversations. But at the end of the day, this really provides a unique opportunity for folks to engage in and very much initiate legacy discussions. When I was a young lawyer, I realized very quickly that people liked to talk about their businesses, what they had done in their business careers, how their business was operating, and how significant the way in which these businesses were operating and serving the needs of clients. And wealth is sort of like that as well. People like talking about what keeps them up at night from a wealth planning perspective, and folks need to get over the initial fear and have conversations that are about, legacy discussions. You need to start with that as a very, I don't even want to say it's a tough conversation, but opening a conversation to really explore from a values-based perspective what's on the mind of clients. Ask them what wealth means to them. Seek their permission to be involved in that process. And I think that's the part that, I guess it wasn't until later in my career, after I became a family enterprise advisor, that in addition to being a lawyer, seeking permission, you're in a place where you actually are able to seek permission to be involved in that process, and asking open-ended questions about legacy are very important. We've touched upon it already as well. Having an opportunity to engage with the next generation, the heirs, if you will, early on in this process is absolutely critical. As I highlighted at the outset, if you leave wealth management and the advisory function, and you leave without touching upon and trying to connect with future heirs, there is a high probability that there's going to be an event, let's say the death of a client, and the family's going to choose, the heirs are going to choose to move those assets. And so engaging heirs early is absolutely essential from my vantage point. It has to be and become a primary goal of IAs in trying to be involved in formulating a strategy around engaging heirs very early on. And one of the easiest hooks, if you will, is through education and inclusion. And again, the initial discussion, I would posit that it gets easier the more you do it, but trying to really gain access to that next generation and engaging with heirs by way of education is a very easy, cost-effective way to deal with some of the inherent risks of doing nothing or being passive. It's also important to collaborate with other professionals in this ecosystem. As I mentioned, there's lots of experts who provide lots of different advice: tax advisors, there's accountants, there's estates and trusts, lawyers, and all of this requires a degree of collaboration. It's not a situation where you need to know everything about everything. That would be scary, of course, but collaboration is quite a liberating approach, and doing it in the context of working with other professionals in the wealth management ecosystem, especially those that are already embedded within existing client relationships. That to me is a very good, effective, efficient way to help in this wealth transfer. So collaborating with other professionals. Also, we touched upon it a little bit in terms of the use of technology and planning tools and that sort of thing. I definitely would not underestimate the importance of using tools like family mission statements, gifting strategies, and doing frequent estate reviews as anything other than very important. And you can be part of that discussion and very much part of the senior decision making that goes on by individuals and clients and families in that regard. So, I would strongly encourage folks to look at using technology, but don't rely on technology to the exclusion of just simple human engagement. Picking up the phone and speaking to clients. This is a very personal issue, and to me, it cries out for a more humanistic, direct approach as opposed to just relying on technology. But at the same time, use technology to help with the formulation of plans and everything else to provide the highest level of service to your clients. So hopefully that answers your question in that regard. You know, what are some of the planning and support strategies that are most effective? You know, we've got and I think you folks have a unique opportunity because there's lots of products that already exist and have longstanding histories in the Canadian context. There's, you know, RESPs, there's now TFSAs, there's first-time home buyers accounts, and there's lots of other strategies, income splitting. And I would just simply say that, again, I can't tell you how many times clients have dropped by to see me and start talking about very sophisticated income splitting. I know when to put the red flag up and to say that requires some very specialized advice from a tax, wills, estates, real estate lawyer. And again, you should not fall into the trap of providing advice in very specialized areas. But it is very important, obviously. So using, you know, intergenerational wealth tools, that, especially in connection with RESPs and TFSAs and first-time homebuyers accounts for folks that wish to help the next generation along while they're alive, as opposed to waiting until it's an estate that's trying to deal with some of these issues. You know, there are some very easy low-lying fruit in that regard. Remember that advisors have a multifaceted role. They can be planners, they can be educators, and they, at the end of the day, are stabilizers as part of this very complex and seemingly turbulent issue that's facing us all. We've touched upon it quite a bit today, but it's worth exploring again here. Fostering financial literacy across the generations is really, really important. And I see this routinely. I see, you know, well-educated families that have very successful businesses, family enterprises, and the like, and yet the next generation is lacking when it comes to financial literacy. So I think, you know, IAs have a very important role to play in that area. And I would just simply highlight something that we've touched on a little bit today already. There's lots of trends around that highlight that gender and diversity considerations need to be part of the equation as well. And Canadian advisors should tailor strategies for women and underrepresented groups. But, you know, as you think about that, and those are complex, very complex topics, right? And Susan, you can probably talk a little bit more about that, but I would simply say, as somebody that's involved in that ecosystem of wealth management, that, you know, every effort should be made to avoid falling into, you know, bias traps. I would assume very little. Be open-minded to receive information that, you know, you might be shocked to hear about, but you shouldn't wriggle in your seat when you hear it, and, you know, avoid making judgments. So that to me is part of being a proponent of fostering financial literacy, and I think it's a very important aspect to keep in the back of your mind. You'll notice, if you can flip to the next page here really quickly, we wanted to provide a little bit of a legacy plan here, and we came up with Laura. Initially, the one that I had designed had the legacy plan for Susan, and then we didn't want to get that confused with Susan, who is on the call. But Laura's legacy plan, very simply, you know, we see a couple of key issues here. We want to support family goals. Laura's story shows the power of proactive planning. RESPs, first-time homebuyers accounts, TFSAs, charitable foundations. These are things that have found their way into Laura's plan. And there's lots of ways and financial tools to facilitate with that. You need professional advice, of course. But this is really essential in helping to engage across the generations and to help build the trust to ensure long-term relationships. And so, Laura's legacy plan, if you have an opportunity to dig your teeth into any plan, you're going to be building trust. And that is an inherent core value that exists within any trusted advisor relationship. And what you're in the end doing is you're transforming your role into becoming one that's more proactively engaged, and is less transactional to more relational in nature, and that ultimately fosters loyalty and success. So, I would just simply close on Laura's legacy plan here by saying, every plan needs to be structured. It takes time. There's not a one size fits all, but it is a values-driven planning exercise where you have an opportunity to play an important role in helping individuals and families retain assets across the generations. And ultimately, again, in my humble opinion, having been on the other side of the table when calls have had to be made to investment advisors, letting them know that their accounts are being relocated, if you handle this appropriately, you're going to strengthen your existing advisor-client bonds with your clients. And I would argue you're going to grow your asset base. So hopefully that's a little bit of help as you think going forward. Now, I'll turn the floor back over to you, and we can figure out where we go from here, Susan, I guess.
For sure. No, and I really appreciate it. And in the interest of everyone's time, I'll just kind of hit the high notes here, because it's really great that you're able to bring actual actions for the advisors you consider doing. I really want to just be able to remind everyone, key points that Mark and I were really looking to share. This is not a transaction. This is highly emotional. This is very personal. It is very complex. And you really have a unique chance here, an opportunity to lean into the purpose, lean into empathy, and offer that more strategic insight. And to Mark's point, with the advice he shared and actions he shared, really building or reinforcing resiliency into your own practices. So, those are the high notes. When you walk away from this session and you ask yourself, so what do they want me to remember? It really is. It's complex, it's personal, it's emotional, it's values driven. And it's really worth it. It's really worth it to lean into that.
Yeah, and I would just elaborate on a couple of things here. Just I agree with the empathy and all of that. Collaboration, absolutely essential. Really work hard at being seen as somebody that's willing to collaborate with other professionals. This isn't one where I hate to borrow a Mark Carney term again, but this isn't one where you get the elbows up. This is where you put the elbows down and you collaborate, and you do so. Why? Because it's in the best interest of your clients. And I think, at the end of the day, we all can help families preserve their wealth, maintain their core values, and provide a little bit of a runway so that families can achieve a higher degree of harmony for generations to come. And this, again, is more of a client-centered focus, but you will be the beneficiary if you handle that correctly. So what I would say, even though I'm not trained in a course called conversation law, I would say let's keep this conversation going. You may even get some formal thanks along the way when you tactfully and respectfully advance conversations and help to develop plans that help your clients to move forward. So I don't have anything else, Susan, at this stage, and hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you both so much. This is really such a thoughtful conversation. We love having webinars that are sort of more rooted in this like idea of human connection versus just serving people a bunch of information that they have to digest. So I think humanizing what's happening with the wealth transfer and humanizing how people are taking in information about finances. And as you both said, like the importance of financial literacy, I think is a really big takeaway for clients and people looking for advice alike. I definitely think a lot of us are going to be sort of changing the way that we think with the information you've provided and the insights. We're out of time today, but we'll definitely be sharing more content about this webinar through our website. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining. Again, it
Thank you
was
for
such a
having
great
us.
discussion. Yes, very informative. We'd also like to thank the audience for their participation today. We hope to see you all again. This webinar is part of our Financial Literacy Month series, and our next webinar is coming up on Thursday, November 20th, also at 1 p.m. It'll be a special CSI Spotlight with Michelle Bayo on demystifying open banking and open finance. A replay of this event will also be available in the coming days. You'll receive it by email. And if you have any additional questions, you can reach out to us at support.csi.ca. Thanks again, everyone, for attending. Bye for now.